and the Word became flesh.
Our stay in the cave was brief, as we soon found shelter in a modest home. Yet, it was within that cave that my son was born. How can I explain it to you, a man, so you truly understand? Perhaps only a woman could fully grasp what transpired that night in the month of Teves. It was unlike any other birth. Yet, in its essence, it was a birth. Simply that. The boy was born, Joseph was there, beside me, breaking the customs that keep men distant from women during the sacred moment. We were alone, yet not entirely. 2 women from the village had agreed to assist me when the time came, and Joseph had managed to alert them before labor began. So, there were 3 to help me, though my good husband knew little more than to keep the fire burning and twist his tunic in his hands. The boy's birth was like a ray of light passing through clear crystal, pure and untainted. The women, preoccupied with the blood and the newborn, didn't notice. Joseph even less so. I sensed something extraordinary, though I was hardly focused on details. I felt the pain, the effort, the contractions, but they brought me more anxiety and nervousness than actual harm. Don't find this strange, dear John. Remember that with God, all things are possible. It was more difficult for me to conceive without knowing a man, and that had already happened. I pondered this often. Perhaps it could have been different, I mean the birth, but it was as it was. I believe the Almighty wished to manifest, once again, His presence, His power, His unique fatherhood, to protect me without compromising my virginity. More likely, from the very first days of my son's life, He wanted to teach a lesson. He had not come into the world to cause suffering or to break what was whole, but to redeem all and rebuild what was broken. Just as sin did not enter the world by God's will, but against it, so it was with my son. The suffering attached to him was immense, not because of him, but because of those who oppose him and, in doing so, harm themselves and others. But these are minor details compared to the most important thing. My son was there, born, and I held him in my arms. How can I explain it, John? He was both a child like any other and yet utterly unique, different. He seemed like a light, but I tell you, more than a light, he was the sun. Holding him, so small, so fragile, a tiny, wrinkled thing with his eyes closed and his little mouth searching for my breast, crying when he didn't find it, it seemed impossible that he could be anything other than a normal baby. Joseph also looked at him with curiosity and a touch of awe, that same awe that strikes a father when he first holds his child. The fear that he might drop him, squeeze him too tightly, or break this delicate little being. Perhaps he thought it would be different, that the boy would be born with some mark of power, that he would be, from the beginning, stronger, smarter, more superhuman. But none of that happened. He was so normal a baby that none of the women noticed anything unusual. They congratulated me on the birth and returned to their homes. Joseph and I were alone. I was exhausted but unable to sleep. I held him in my arms, wrapped in blankets, receiving the warmth of my chest, close to the animals that blocked the cave entrance, keeping out the cold wind of early Teves. Outside, it was night, and by the light of the small fire Joseph kept burning, not too high, to avoid too much smoke, the cave seemed illuminated by the brightest spotlight. Not that rays of light emanated from the boy. He was the light. His angelic face was radiant, and the firelight multiplied on his cheeks as if reflected in a mirror like those used by noble ladies. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I gazed at him, and for the first time in that cave, a place I had wished I could transform into a palace in his honor, I experienced a feeling I'd never known before. As I watched him, a sense of awe washed over me, and I began to worship him. It startled me. You know that in our faith, any representation of the Almighty is forbidden, and we are incredibly careful even when speaking God's name. The omnipotent cannot be captured by human hands, which are prone to create idols that they then worship, just as they manipulate them. This understanding was deeply ingrained within me. Who is this child? I asked myself, my eyes lost in his peaceful sleep. He is the Messiah, I answered myself immediately. But what kind of Messiah? And, most importantly, if he is simply a messenger from the Most High, sent to rescue his people from oppression, like Moses, the judges, or the kings, why wasn't he born in a normal way? Why wasn't he conceived like other human beings, from the love between a husband and wife? If he came into the world in this way, with this origin, who is his true father? While it's clear that I am his mother, only God can claim his paternity. Don't think these were too many thoughts for a woman who had just given birth, John. On the contrary, it was the least one could consider on such a blessed night. There, warming him with my own body heat and the abundance of my milk, holding his fragile little form and caring for the vulnerability of the one who had been announced as the Messiah, the only thing I could do was stand in awe of God's plan and meditate on the why of these things and how they would unfold. I love you, I whispered to him, kissing his face. I love you, and I thank God for bringing you to me. It wasn't easy, and I was so afraid. But now that you're here, it all feels worthwhile. I almost wish, I murmured to my little one, that none of what the angel foretold would come to pass. I never dreamed of grand achievements beyond my grasp, nor did I aspire to be revered and admired. Now, transformed into the mother of the Messiah, everything feels so strange. What kind of Messiah are you, born in a humble sheep shelter, adored by a cow and a donkey, with two simple villagers as your parents? Where is your power? Where is your grandeur? And yet, I wasn't disappointed. You are worth more than anything that could come from you, and I know this because I am your mother. I pray that everyone will learn the same truth when you grow and fulfill the mission for which you were born. I hope people will love you for who you are, for what you represent, for your message, for your triumphs, or perhaps even for your miracles. But I, my dear boy, will love you unconditionally. It's not that I disregard the rest, for that would be to diminish God's plans, but understand me, I am your mother, and in this heart, you will always find pure love, love for you, not just for what you might bring. You are a gift, a treasure, and if there were nothing else, you would be enough for me. Joseph listened to me, sitting beside me, ever watchful of the fire. Suddenly, he asked to hold the peacefully sleeping child. He had held him briefly before, as custom dictated, after the village women had bathed the baby and presented him, announcing that he was a boy. But he had quickly returned him to me, as if afraid he might drop him. Now, he asked again. I carefully placed the child in his arms, being careful not to wake him. Joseph held him securely, wrapped in the finest cloth we could find in the village. The arms of the man I loved so deeply, the man who had accepted to be his father without being his biological father, even foregoing the possibility of having other children, my son rested for a long while, sleeping soundly. Joseph, usually so quiet, said nothing. Only after gazing at him for a long time did he kiss the baby's pale cheek and whisper softly, so as not to wake him, "My son, I love you too. I don't know what blood runs in your veins, beyond that of your mother. I don't know who you are, a normal man or an extraordinary being hidden beneath this simple appearance. I don't even know if I should prostrate myself before you, as the Messiah you are said to be. What I do know is that you need me now, and you can count on me for everything. I thank the Most High for trusting me to collaborate in His work. To assist Him, the Almighty, is the greatest of honors, the greatest blessing. I don't know what your followers will say one day, if you even have any. If serving you is a burden for anyone, it will be because they haven't understood anything. To be an instrument of God is not a burden, but a privilege. To dedicate my entire life to Him, to you, is the greatest happiness I could have ever hoped for. Therefore, I call you my son today, and I tell you that I am here to give my life for you, to watch over your sleep, to care for your mother, to make it possible for you, when God wills it, to undertake the work for which you came into the world. He kissed the boy again and returned him to me. We slept soundly that night. Joseph lay beside me, keeping me warm, occasionally rising to add more wood to the fire. Soon, dawn arrived. Thankfully, our landlord's cow, after being dry for several days due to a beating, was now producing milk. Joseph milked her and warmed it for me, crumbling bread into it and adding honey. He fed me, made sure I was comfortable, and then went to the village. He had to fulfill the legal obligation of registration, and he was eager to be done with it. When he returned, he had already registered us in the Roman census. He had even managed to pay the initial tax for all three of us, thanks largely to the help that generous Leah had given us. And so began, John, the collaboration of good people in my son's work of redemption. Others soon followed, but I didn't leave the bed Joseph had made for me that first day. Though it was simply straw, it was surprisingly comfortable and warm. He went back and forth to the village, preparing food and attending to my every need. Being so skilled, he had even fashioned a cradle from an old manger we found in another part of the cave, so that I could place my son there for a while the next day. The two women who had helped me during labor visited in the morning. They brought me chicken broth with a boiled egg in a clay pot, and some wonderful honey biscuits. Otherwise, it seemed as if the world had forgotten us, and we didn't expect any more visitors. It was late at night, and Joseph was sleeping beside me, as he had the night before, sharing his warmth, when we were awakened by footsteps at the entrance of the cave. The donkey rose and began to bray. The cow shifted as if to get up, but then settled back down. Joseph jumped up and went straight outside, startled and expecting the worst, ready to risk his life to defend us. A rough voice, weathered by wine, quickly reassured him. Inside the cave, I heard everything, initially worried, then surprised, clutching my child to my chest, ready to escape through the other end of the cave and seek refuge in the darkness. Of the night, it was a group of shepherds, telling a very strange story that contrasted sharply with the ordinary nature of my son's birth and his first few hours of life. Though it was winter, the coldest time of year, they slept down in the valley with their flocks of sheep, as there's always some grazing even at that time of year, as you know. To guard against thieves, they worked in shifts, and while some rested, two remained with the animals near a large fire they kept burning. In the preceding days, Joseph and I had seen these points of light in the distance at night, like faint stars in the valley, and we knew that those rough but good men were warming themselves around them. There were 8 or 9 of them. The one who spoke first, the oldest of the group, told Joseph a remarkable tale. An angel had appeared to them and, after calming their fears, had said, "I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people, not just for you. Today in the town of David a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." One, the shepherd leader, whose name was Rasan, also said they seemed to hear choirs of angels in the sky, and some thought they heard a kind of hymn like those sung in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, saying something like, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." This had happened in the first hour of the night. They had rushed to the village, asking at the inns if any births had occurred in recent days. No one knew anything. They were growing desperate when a scribe, from the group that had gone to Bethlehem, with the official in charge of registering people and collecting taxes, told them that early that morning a man had registered himself, his wife, and their newborn son, whom he had named Jesus. However, he didn't know where the man lived. Another person remembered his wife telling him that the couple staying in the caves outside the city had had a child and that she had helped the mother, who was very young, beautiful, and poor. No further information was needed. Soon they were standing in front of our cave, begging Joseph to let them see the child, because the boy must be very special, and according to the angel, he would be the Savior of Israel, designated by the heavenly messenger with the title Lord, reserved for God Almighty. They meant no harm, they only wanted to pay him homage and share in our joy. Many were surprised that the Messiah had been born in such a humble place, but they didn't dare question the angel's words, at least until they saw for themselves whether he was truly someone extraordinary. Joseph was hesitant, fearing a trap. From inside the cave, confined to my bed, I sensed his hesitation and asked him to let them in. Perhaps, I thought, my son should begin his work soon. They entered the cave one by one, led by my husband. They held their caps in their hands and carried small leather pouches slung over their shoulders, from which they hastily pulled out meager gifts. They looked at me and Jesus, clearly surprised. For several moments that felt like an eternity, a profound silence reigned, unbroken even by the sounds of the animals. Suddenly, one of them exclaimed, "This is a hoax. There's just a normal baby here, in the same cave where we keep our sheep. I don't see the Messiah anywhere. We must be mistaken. Another child must have been born in some other house in Bethlehem. Let's go and leave these starving people in peace. They're as much the parents of the Savior of Israel as I am a prophet." Immediately, Rasan jumped as if bitten by a snake and shoved his companion, almost knocking him to the ground. "Silence, you fool!" he exclaimed. "Who appointed you the identifier of the Messiah? Wasn't David born in a humble home? Didn't they even mistake Samuel, and didn't Yahweh have to correct them, warning them that God's gaze is not like the gaze of man, for man looks at outward appearances, but God looks at the heart? If we, who claim to be descendants of the great King David, haven't learned this lesson, who in Israel will remember it? This boy could be as great as Samson or Gideon. Who are we to doubt it? Not only is the angel's word at stake, but there's something in this cave I've never felt before, not even in the synagogue or when I visit the temple in Jerusalem. I don't know what it is, but looking at this child and his mother, I feel something inside me, in my very gut and heart, urging me to be a better man. With that, Rasan knelt as one does before nobles and great lords. The others, including the one who seemed most skeptical, followed suit. They asked us to pray to the Most High for them and their families and place the few things they had brought beside my bed. Then, understanding that it wasn't the right time to disturb a mother who had recently given birth, and although the baby hadn't woken throughout all of this, they decided to leave. They were already saying their goodbyes when Joseph stopped them to ask a great favor. I would ask you, friends, he said, to keep the story of the angel a secret. If the news spreads, the boy's life might be in danger, for there will be those who feel threatened by the arrival of a Messiah. So, please don't tell anyone, and I also ask that you let us remain unnoticed in Bethlehem. We will stay here for a few days, and when we can, now that we have registered in the census of Augustus, we will return to our village. If you know of a house where we could stay and any work I could find, as I am a skilled craftsman, I would be very grateful for the information. You see, Joseph said when they had left, we are still in God's hands, even when we feel alone. The Lord carries out his plans in mysterious ways, and what happened with the shepherds should strengthen our faith. Now rest, while I tidy up these gifts. Tomorrow, we'll surely find a place to stay until you're strong enough to return home. But it wasn't to be. We remained in the cave for 2 more weeks until the crowds who had come to Bethlehem for the census thinned out, and we finally found lodging in an old house on the outskirts of the village, offered to us by the family of one of the shepherds who had visited us that night. They were incredibly kind. We rarely saw them, but each day we found a gift at the cave entrance, humble things, but always of great use to us, as we were in need of everything. They always left them at night while we slept, and only occasionally did they come during the day in small groups, begging to see the baby and asking me, as the greatest of favors, to hold him in their arms for even a moment. They said they wanted to tell their children and grandchildren that they had helped the Messiah on his way and, in doing so, had been of service to God, which, for them, who knew so little of the world, was a blessing from heaven, from the shepherds. John, I learned how different people are, sometimes for reasons we don't fully understand, depending on their background. For the poor, any gift they receive is a cause for joy. Those who have everything don't always give thanks, and nothing ever seems enough. For the humble and simple, helping God is a blessing, because they understand that they are elevated by being useful to the Almighty. On the other hand, those who could give often feel that if they help, they will lose something. And furthermore, they believe that God is not doing them a favor by asking for help. On the contrary, the Most High should be grateful if they agree to fulfill his requests. From the shepherds, John, I understood that our elders are right when they say that the sin of the evil one is pride. Pride separates us from God and his grace more than anything else. Pride appears in abundance when we fail to realize that God deserves everything and that when we give him everything, we are simply fulfilling our duty. During the week, we called the mohel to circumcise the boy, as the law commands. We had to do this in the cave, but neither I nor our new friends were ashamed, because poverty is only shameful when it comes from neglect, and that was not our case. Aju, the mohel of Bethlehem, asked Joseph the ritual question, "What name do you wish to give the boy?" To everyone's surprise, my husband answered as the angel had instructed him, "He shall be called Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." With a perfect cut, the circumciser left the mark of our lineage on my little one, saying, "Blessed be the Lord our God, who has sanctified us with his precepts and commanded us circumcision." After this, Joseph, the 10 witnesses, as the law requires, and I responded, "Blessed is the one you have chosen and brought near." Meanwhile, the boy cried inconsolably in my arms. It was the first time he had done so, as if symbolizing that this law would cause him pain and suffering. The small piece of skin and the blood lay on the table, staining a clean linen cloth, red on white, the flesh separated. I don't know what cloud obscured my vision, what funereal omens passed through my heart, but I held my son close and nursed him. This calmed him. The days passed, and Joseph spent all his time working to provide for our household. He was usually paid for his work in kind, bread, wine, an old hen on one occasion, which gave us a very good broth, vegetables, some clothes. We had the cows, milk, and so we managed. Finally, as I said, we were able to leave the cave. We were in our new house when the 40 days since the boy's birth were completed, the time prescribed by law to redeem our firstborn son at the temple, and also for my purification, as, according to the same law, I was considered ritually unclean after childbirth. Not that I felt I was at fault, as you will understand, for having accepted that God's will be done in me, bringing about the birth of the Messiah, but we decided it was best not to cause any talk and to strictly follow the order of things. Again, as on so many occasions, we chose prudence. It wasn't cowardice. It was simply the wisdom of the poor. It's not worth drawing attention to oneself except for important things, as my son would later do when he performed healings on the Sabbath to bring relief to others. Peace is almost always preferable, even if it means paying the price of not doing exactly what is best. The best is often the enemy of the good. Conflicts should be avoided whenever possible, whenever the good at stake is not greater, because peace is such a great thing that there are few things for which it would be worth losing. We bought 2 doves at the market, which we offered to the Levite, along with the 5 shekels for the redemption of the boy. It was then that a woman named Anna, who was known as a prophetess and had spent her entire life in service to the temple, approached me without my noticing. Apparently, this was one of her activities, observing the mothers who came to the house of God with their children and, after saying a few kind words, moving on to others, as if she were always searching for someone she couldn't find. Some thought she was mad, while others thought she was simply a good woman who had no children of her own and enjoyed being around other people's children. When she saw Jesus, she showered him with praise, unlike anything she said about other children. I barely had time to thank her for her kind words and blessings when Anna asked us not to move from there for a few moments. She soon returned, accompanied by an old man named Simeon, another familiar figure around the temple. Anna said to him, "Look, look, look closely into his eyes. See the light in his hair. Use your old senses, Simeon, and recognize the purity of his mother. He is here, it's him. We've finally found him." Simeon approached me slowly. I initially held the boy tighter to my chest and made to leave, as all of this frightened me. I was always so afraid that something bad might happen to this fragile creature. I felt as though I was being watched by the force of evil, which could not bear that the Redeemer of mankind had been born. Then he said something that stopped me in my tracks. He called me by the same title that Elizabeth had used, full of grace, he said in a hoarse, cavernous voice that could frighten children on winter nights. "I beg you, let me see him." I looked at Joseph, and seeing his hesitation, I chose to show him the boy for a moment, but without letting go of him. The boy was awake and already beginning to smile, something he did frequently for almost everyone who approached him. This smile was what Simeon saw when he brought his face close to my son's. He remained like this for several minutes, leaning over the boy, tall as he was. He looked at him with those dark eyes that stood out in his wrinkled face and gave him an almost terrifying expression. He remained like this until he drew back from me and raised his arms to heaven, remaining silent for a while longer, his gaze fixed upwards, watched also in silence not only by Anna, Joseph, and me, but also by a growing group of curious onlookers. Suddenly, he exclaimed in a powerful voice, "Now, Lord, according to your promise, you may dismiss your servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and the glory of your people Israel." His words were very beautiful. They were immediately met with expressions of joy and surprise from those present and helped us reaffirm the certainty that, behind the apparent normality of our son, lay a mystery of salvation that holy men could perceive. Therefore, with Joseph's permission, I let him hold the boy. He took him in his trembling arms, always under our watchful eyes, careful not to drop him. He kissed his forehead and soon returned him to me. To our surprise, when Jesus was back in my arms, he knelt before him, something, as you know, John, Jews never do before any human being, as this is strictly forbidden. Joseph quickly helped him up, so that he wouldn't be seen by a priest and accused of blasphemy. We had already said goodbye to him and Anna and were heading towards the exit of the temple to avoid the crowd of curious people who wanted to see the boy when we heard a scream behind us. We turned around, fearing that he had fainted and needed our help. We saw him standing with his legs spread and his arms raised to the sky. His gnarled staff was on the ground beside him. He really did look like a prophetic figure like the ones our elders told stories about. His scream was one of pain, of anguish, almost of terror. His gaze was fixed on the sky and remained there for several minutes. Soon, a circle formed around him again, this time larger. Many of the temple attendees knew and respected him. Then everyone realized that he had just received a divine inspiration. After a while, he lowered his arms, his shoulders slumped as if they had received a great weight. He looked me straight in the eyes. Joseph and I approached him, ready to support him if he weakened and fell. We were very close. I could almost feel his breath on my face. He spoke to me in a low, agonized voice. "This is set," he said, "for the fall or rise of many in Israel, and for a sign that will be spoken against, so that the counsels of many hearts may be revealed. And a sword will pierce your own soul." Joseph put his arms around me and pulled me by the shoulder. But I could not stop looking at Simeon, whose eyes were beginning to fill with tears. We stood frozen in the middle of that circle of curious people who were beginning to discuss the strangeness of the prophecy the old man had uttered about the boy and his mother, uncertain whether it was a blessing or a curse, due to its ambiguous nature. Simeon suddenly turned and walked away from us quickly, sobbing. Anna followed him, asking what he had seen and what he meant, why he had said those terrible words about the sword to me. Motionless, we watched them walk away and disappear into one of the temple courts. The crowd then turned their curious gaze upon us, and it was difficult for us to escape from the crowd and leave the temple. With a great fright in our bodies and souls, walking back to Bethlehem, we had time to reflect on what had happened. Joseph tried in vain to dismiss it as something unimportant. Yet we both knew that it was significant, another warning from heaven. And the worst part was that we did not know what the old man had meant when he delivered his strange prophecy. Then I felt as if an angel were passing a gentle hand over my oppressed heart. Night was falling, and the sky, as was typical of the season, was covered with clouds that obscured the fading daylight. Yet I realized that the light of the Lord was enveloping us, and I regained my peace. Look, I said to my husband, we must look on the bright side. The two old men have given us a wonderful lesson, and they certainly spoke for God. The most important thing is that this boy we are to care for is indeed the Messiah, and that his work will be to redeem his people. But we know that this task will bring difficulties. In any case, the Almighty will always be there, watching over him as he has done until now. And as for me, the story of the sword frightens me, but I believe that this is the role of all mothers, to live always suffering for their children, fearing their misfortunes, and suffering more than they themselves do when difficulties come. When I accepted the angel's invitation, I did not do so to cover myself with glory and to be honored by the women of Israel as the mother of the Messiah, but to be useful to God. I only ask the Lord that everything that happens to me will serve to alleviate his suffering, that I may suffer, but that he may not, that the sword that must pierce my heart, as the good old man prophesied, will not enter the heart of our son. And may God give me the strength to endure everything. That was how that strange day unfolded. We arrived at our humble home and were preparing to return to Nazareth as quickly as possible when something happened that once again introduced mystery into our lives.